This episode was suggested by a listener, Elena, via our website. If you'd like to suggest a topic, you can do so on Facebook and Instagram at Morbid Curiosity Podcast, on Twitter at Morbid Podcast, and on our website, www.morbidcuriositypodcast.com. Humans are fascinated by gore and violence, but even more so, the mysterious and unsolved. Interest in these disturbing and unpleasant subjects is called morbid curiosity, and it has gripped hundreds of people throughout the ages. I am one of those people. My name is Hallie, and this is the Morbid Curiosity Podcast. Magic is an ancient concept that originates back before written history. The concept of a curse is likely just as ancient. A curse, in this context, is a sort of wish that some misfortune will befall or attach to a person, a group of people, a place, or an object. Usually this wish is requested of a supernatural or spiritual power, such as a god or goddess, a spirit, or natural force. Later in time, these wishes could be enacted by a person believed to be imbued with magic or witchcraft. In this episode, we're going to focus on a specific type of curse casting, one that left physical evidence in the archaeological record, something that is usually rare in the case of cultural concepts like magic. Among ancient Mediterranean cultures, such as the Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians, objects known today as curse tablets, or defictiones in Latin, were created in an attempt to exact one person's will over another. The word defixio is derived from the Latin word defigere, meaning to pin down or bind. To date, around 1,600 tablets with curse text on them have been found in the Mediterranean, various parts of Europe, and northern Africa, what was known as the Graeco-Roman world during the Classical era, between the 6th century BCE and the 6th to 7th century CE. Some of the oldest tablets come from Sicily and Attica, where it's likely the making of defictiones originates. This was a time when magic was pervasive in Greco-Roman literature. Now famous poets, writers, and philosophers spoke of it, including Plato. It was in the Hellenistic period, between 323 BCE and 31 BCE, that most of the writing about magic was produced. This is a period in which the Roman Empire emerged and conquered Egypt. Hellenistic refers to Greek culture, which heavily influenced the Romans at this time and afterwards. It's possible that these writings indicate an avid interest in magic at this time, but it could also be that earlier texts just haven't survived, and this interest was common before this period. Either way, magic was becoming systemized, with handbooks and recipes being written to show the proper way to do it. With the rise of Christianity in the Mediterranean world, many of these magical texts were burned, but enough have survived to give modern researchers a glimpse into the magical beliefs of those who practiced it. Be aware, however, that the term magic usually refers to some type of ritual that isn't part of the regular religion of a culture. The term doesn't really define anything specific, but for this episode it will be used to describe the making of defictiones and the effects that they were believed to bring about, even though defictiones did invoke deities that were worshipped at the time. The ancient Greeks and Romans were pagan, believing in multiple gods, with the Roman pantheon being nearly identical to the ancient Greek pantheon, but with different names and some added qualities from many of the cultures they absorbed as they conquered Europe and the Mediterranean. Gods of death and the afterlife, known as chthonic or underworld gods, were especially associated with curse tablets. Magic fell into two categories in the Greco-Roman world: theurgy and goetia. Theurgy was a type of religious magic. Priests used it as representatives of the divine. Goetia was used by sorcerers and wizards and involved charms and curses. To some writers at the time, it was considered a lower form of magic. Plato wrote that healers, prophets, and sorcerers were real and mostly controlled by laws and should not be feared. Too much interest in the supernatural was regarded with suspicion. However, magic didn't necessarily conflict with conventional religion either. Curses and magic used the ideology of religion and its practices, such as sacrifices. The intentions of religion and magic were quite different, as was the relationship between the gods and humans, but magic often placed the victims of defecciones in the hands of the divine in order to force the victim to face the god's wrath. In some ways, defecciones were attempts to force the gods to punish a person who had done wrong. However, modern researchers are fairly confident curse tablets were not considered good or lawful. While no laws specifically outlaw the creation of defecciones, they are spoken of in the literature of the time as illegal and were often a plot device used to get literary characters into trouble. In his dialogue, Laws, Plato proposes laws against defecciones, but it's not known if he's filling a void where he felt a law should be or echoing an unwritten law. Plato also wrote that people who created curse tablets were severely punished, sometimes with death. But again, there are no mentions specifically about defecciones in any documented Roman laws. It's possible defecciones fell under another name or category and just weren't referred to specifically. A law from 479 BCE states that it was a capital offense to prepare and use pharmaca, which is translated as poisonous potions. Some researchers think it's possible that this law could have extended to spells and curses. Because of the punishments mentioned and the very personal nature of most defecciones, it's believed that these binding spells were not a public affair, but a very private one. While there are some examples of public threats of cursing, such as statues of Hermes on property lines which threaten to harm those who trespass, these tablets were more likely created by individuals or possibly by practitioners of the magical arts for private clients. It's thought practitioners were responsible for some of them, as some tablets show evidence of having been pre-etched, and then the name of the victim squeezed into a space that had been left blank. A collection of defecciones found in a fountain in Rome also seem to bear similar handiwork. I'll talk more about this collection after the ad break. The type of spells written on curse tablets are what archaeologists and historians refer to as binding spells. These were meant to bind or restrict a certain individual, and sometimes animals, to the creator of the tablet's will. Most tablet curses had to do with rivals in business, athletic competitions, and court cases. Some were also of an erotic nature, either trying to break up a couple or draw another individual to the curse caster. Most times, these tablets were made of lead and were folded up before being deposited in a specific secret location, such as a grave or well. Some had nails driven through them. Others had hair or a piece of clothing that belonged to the victim. Some were even accompanied by effigies or small figurines that were meant to represent the victim. These figurines were made of clay, lead, or wax, and were often depicted with hands and feet bound, sometimes with nails driven through the specific body part the curse was supposed to affect. We'll get into how and why curse tablets and effigies were made and used after the ad break. This type of magic, in which things are done to an object in order to represent what the caster wants to happen to a human, is called sympathetic magic or imitative magic. It's based largely on imitation, using effigies or stand-ins for a person or environment that the caster intends to affect. Many times, this type of magic requires a link to the victim, such as a personal item or name. Sometimes sympathetic magic also involves correspondence, the idea that a person can influence something based on its similarity to another thing, such as a corpse acting as a reference for how a living person will act if cursed, still and silent. Defecciones were not the only type of magic practiced by the Graeco-Romans. Amulets were also popular and made specifically in defense of curses. They were usually made from similar materials as curse tablets, but sometimes included precious stones or beetles. Some even resembled defecciones exactly, except that they were not deposited anywhere and were instead carried around with the person who wanted protection. This shows that these curses were common, and fear of them was quite widespread. Besides their magical purposes, curse tablets are also major cultural, historical, and linguistic valuables. They represent some of the best preserved language texts of colloquial Oscan, Greek, and Latin. They also indicate the diffusion of what was originally thought to be a Greek form of magic, which shows a spread of Greek culture through the Romans. Some tablets contain the names of known politicians, and therefore depict a moment in history when those who disagreed with them decided to do something about it. At first, defecciones were only used to study linguistic changes by archaeologists. As time passed, changes and variety could be seen in the linguistic style, as well as changes in the reasons the tablets were made. Italian and Greek tablets began to be used to study the history of magic in the Greco-Roman world. Some researchers conclude that in the earliest tablets, the magic was in the writing and speaking of the spell. This is supported by certain scrolls or papyri that contain recipes for such spells, which state that speaking the spell as it was written was important. Later, this changed to the sympathetic manipulation of the tablet or effigy figurine. Before we get into how the tablets were made and the types of curses they contained, let's pause for a word from our sponsors. Our regular sponsor is Audible.com. Audible can provide you with interesting and engaging audiobooks. In fact, there are over 180,000 of them to choose from, which you can listen to on your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or other MP3 players. MCP listeners can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial of Audible.com by going to www.audibletrial.com/MCP. You can also find this link on our Facebook page and website. If you sign up for the free trial, you get a free audiobook that is yours to keep, even if you cancel the service as soon as you finish downloading it. And the MCP gets the funding it needs to keep bringing morbid history to your ears. So go get your free audiobook on us. Lastly, if you like this podcast, why not sponsor the MCP yourself by becoming a patron on Patreon? Over 45,000 people download this podcast every month, but only around 140 people are supporting us on Patreon. For a mere $1 an episode, that's $2 a month, you can get ad-free episodes, bonus behind-the-scenes info, give your opinion by answering polls, have access to all the horror story readings, and get updates on past episodes. For $3 an episode, you get monthly outtake reels. For $5, you get a monthly quiz episode where I quiz my husband on past episodes. For $10, you get a detailed bibliography of all the resources I've used while researching an episode. And for $20, you get a bit of miscellaneous morbidity, a short essay on a random morbid topic every month. Previously, we have reviewed horror video games and television shows, discussed the plague pits of London, and tried out historic recipes from previous episodes. All of these rewards aside, your patronage supports the podcast and keeps new episodes coming. I can't keep doing this podcast without you, so go to bit.ly/morbidpatron, that's bit.ly/morbidpatron, to choose your rewards and support the MCP. You'll have my eternal gratitude. And now, back to the podcast. As I said in the beginning of the episode, defecciones are found in archaeological contexts dating from the 6th century BCE to the 6th to 7th century CE. That's over 1,000 years, during which the formula and purpose didn't change much. Handbooks on how to make defecciones don't appear until the later part of this time frame, but as the recipes result in tablets nearly identical to early versions, it's safe to say the method of creating them must have been standard for hundreds of years before the handbooks were written. Most defecciones were made of thin lead sheets, on which the curse was inscribed. Limestone, gems, papyrus, wax, and ceramic were also used, but lead is most commonly found in archaeology. This is likely because it was a common material for regular letters at the time. It was durable, easy to come by, and inexpensive. A spell text was usually inscribed in the soft metal with some sort of stylus. The text usually followed a specific formula or template. A victim was identified, a god or spirit might be invoked, and what the caster wished to happen to the victim was described. Sometimes the name of the caster was also included, usually in the case of love or erotic defecciones, which I'll get into in a moment. The earliest tablets were simple. The victim's name only was inscribed into the lead sheet. The name was sometimes scrambled or written backwards, likely as part of the curse. Most of these more simple defecciones come from Attica and Sicily in the 5th to 4th century BCE. This doesn't mean there wasn't a more complex verbal spell involved with making and depositing the tablets. The words just weren't written on them. Later, a longer, more formal spell was written and usually followed a specific formula. This suggests the process of cursing had become standardized and was likely written down somewhere. Indeed, many documents, likely written by professional magical practitioners, have been found from later time periods that discuss the making of curse tablets as well as other magical spells and ideas. These documents date from between the 100s BCE and the 400s CE and are often in the form of recipes. Altogether, these various documents are called the Greek magical papyri, or papyri Graeco-Magicae in Latin, which is abbreviated as PGM. Most researchers feel that as the objects mentioned in the PGM have been found in archaeology, it's safe to say these documents are copies of older handbooks for creating tablets and figurines. Several texts in the PGM indicate that many times the creation of the tablets was accompanied by verbal recitation and possibly gestures and a sacrifice of some sort. Several curse tablets mention killing animals, such as roosters, as part of the ritual. Later, even more complex tablets appeared and included voces mysticae, or magical words, with no known meaning in any known language. These magic words only begin during the Roman period in the 1st century CE. Some specific magic words were used in the classical and Hellenistic periods, but were limited to 7 or so that were used repeatedly. These 7 must have been well known and widespread before more magical words came into circulation during the Roman period. In fact, in some Roman defecciones, voces mysticae sometimes make up 80 to 90% of the text on a tablet. These magic words are thought by modern researchers to represent a language meant for the gods, spirits, demons, or other entity that the tablet invoked. They may have also been made up in order to make the curse recipe or a professional practitioner seem necessary in order to create a proper binding curse. Strange symbols were also used and may have served a similar purpose. They were thought to embody great power despite their unknown meanings. Later Roman-era tablets also use more complex versions of the names of the gods, as well as a wider variety of gods, including Egyptian gods and some Hebrew-influenced spirits and entities. Drawings of humans and animal figures also became more prevalent at this time, while figurines became less common. Many of the magic recipe books also show a heavy Egyptian influence, suggesting they were produced and copied out in Egypt, indicating an intensifying fusion of cultures. As for what's written on the tablets, Dr. Christopher A. Farrawan of the University of Chicago created 4 basic categories that most defecciones fall into based on the formula of the text. The first is direct binding, in which the phrases declared by the caster were directly attempting to manipulate the victim. The victim was named and sometimes further identified by their mother's or some other relation's name, but this second identifier is usually only seen in tablets created after the 2nd century CE. The matrilineal name may be influenced by Egyptian or Babylonian writings, who used matrilineal descent as a means of identification. An example of a direct binding spell is, I curse, and then the victim's name, whose mother is, and then her name. The second type is the prayer, in which the curse invoked a deity, either obliging them to punish the victim or praying that they take action against the victim. For example, Hermes, bind the victim. The Greek god Hermes, a messenger and underworld god, was the most often invoked. Also popular were Hecate, Kori, Persephone, Hades, Gaia, Kronos, and the Furies, all of which are considered underworld gods, or gods that spend time in both the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. Hecate was a goddess specifically in charge of magic and sorcery. Nemesis, Pluto, Mercury, and ancestral spirits known as the Manes, as well as water nymphs, also appeared on Latin defecciones. In Roman Egypt, between the 3rd and 6th century CE, gods, demons with secret names, and foreign deities were all blended together. The third text type is the wish formula, where the tablet is in third person, and the only subject of the text is the victim. An example would be, "May the victim tremble." The last type is the similia similibus, or sympathetic magic, which uses metaphor and simile to compare the victim's destiny with that of something else, such as the dead person the tablet is placed with, or the lead on which the curse is written. For example, the tablet might read, "May the victim become like this corpse, still and silent," or "May the victim become like this lead, cold and bound." This type of curse is an example of correspondence in sympathetic magic. After the curse was inscribed, the lead sheet was either folded or rolled up. This is found both within the PGM and archaeological contexts. Sometimes a lock of hair or piece of clothing belonging to the victim was included in the folds of the tablet. Sometimes a nail or pin was driven through the lead sheet, or it was wrapped around a figure or effigy meant to represent the victim. These nails, according to Pharaon, were being used just as they are used in regular life, to fasten down or bind the curse to the victim. Figurines were often made of lead, wax, or clay, and were only a few centimeters tall. The limbs were often bound or twisted, and sometimes pierced by nails or needles, for the same reason as the tablets. The first mention of wax figurines being made in the image of personal enemies and buried in graves to bring harsh treatment upon them comes from Middle Kingdom Egypt between 2133 and 1786 BCE. The inclusion of this type of figurine with defecciones hints at the great influence Egyptian culture had on Graeco-Roman magic. The use of nails in a figurine is sometimes thought to originate in Greece, but has been found in the outlying Roman provinces in what is now Germany, Austria, Britain, and France. Sometimes these figurines were replaced by drawings of a person in a similar predicament. Both figurines and drawings were also sometimes placed in lead containers in order to better catch them in the curse. These containers could also represent coffins, creating a symbolic separation of the victim from the community of the living and delivering them into the hands of the underworld gods. Figurines were usually, but not always, reserved for love or erotic defecciones. Erotic love was understood by most ancient Greeks and Romans to be an accursed thing that attacked humans. It burned them, tortured them, made them ill, and could even kill, so it's not surprising erotic love spells were also cast using the defixio method. The erotic binding spells on defecciones reflect this idea, with phrases like, "Let her burn until she leaves her husband," or "Make him senseless until he comes to me." One Greek curse tablet was found in the mouth of an Egyptian mummy. It contained a lock of hair and begged a demon to cause a woman to swoon, burn, and be destroyed by love until she left her husband and went to the caster for passion. One of the most elaborate and also disturbing defixio figurines found in archaeology is associated with an erotic binding spell. A clay figurine of a woman with bound hands and feet was found in Antinopolis, Egypt, from the 3rd or 4th century CE. The figure is pierced by 13 metal pins in both eyes, ears, the top of the head, the solar plexus, the mid-back, the vagina, the anus, the palms of the hands, and the soles of the feet. This may appear at first to look like torture, but the inscription reads that a woman named Ptolemus must abandon her haughty demeanor and make love to a man named Sarapamnon, otherwise be unable to eat, drink, or do anything else until she does. A manuscript with a recipe for a nearly identical figurine was found in Egypt from around the same time period. It even includes where to place the pins for specific effects and what to say whilst doing so. Other examples of figurines have also been found in Egypt, such as 2 wax figures molded together and wrapped in papyrus with a spell written on it. This type of wax and paper defixio has survived better in Egypt due to the dry climate. Figurines of horses have also been uncovered as part of defecciones against charioteers and other horse racing athletes. After creation, defecciones were placed in a specific location, one that pertained to the underworld gods or whatever entity the caster chose to enact the curse. The earliest tablets were placed in graves, usually the graves of people who died young or tragically. While graves served as passages to the underworld and were therefore closer to the underworld gods, they were also silent, still places in which the dead were contained, and the caster usually hoped, as indicated by the text, that their victim too would grow silent, still, and contained. These tablets were usually placed long after the person was buried. Many of them invoked the dead person's spirit and promised them rest in the afterlife if they completed their task. It's not known if the spirit was supposed to transmit the curse to the gods, enact it, or both. It's also not known if the person who wrote the tablet or some other third party was the one to place it in the grave. Later, fountains and wells were used. For erotic defecciones, sometimes the tablets were hidden somewhere in the home of the victim, and for athletic rivals, the tablet might be buried or hidden somewhere in the stadium in which they were to compete. In 19 CE, Tacitus, a Roman historian and politician, described a case in which curse tablets and figurines had been placed all around the walls and in the floors of a house. Most defecciones are found exactly where they were deposited in the past. Sometimes this makes for a collection of tablets in one location, which must have been the most convenient place for locals to deposit them. This gives greater context to what was going on when the tablets were deposited, as they can often be dated more easily thanks to the location. Around 130 tablets dating to the 2nd through 4th century CE were unearthed in the British city of Bath in the early 1980s. Bath was a part of the Roman province of Britannia, so it makes sense that the practice of making defecciones would have traveled there with the Romans. These defecciones call upon the goddess Sulis Minerva, a version of the Greek war goddess Athena specific to the city, to aid in the return of items that were stolen from patrons while they were soaking in the baths, and to curse the thieves. They are written in British Latin, and are one of few examples of everyday spoken vernacular of the Romano-British population, making them very important to the study of that linguistic dialect. The text they contain, in my opinion, is quite relatable, as many people today still have things stolen from them while they're at public pools or gyms, and still curse the thieves who stole them, although a little less formally. Thefts from the Roman baths seem to have been a common problem, as indicated by the sheer number of defecciones. There's also some indication of this in the PGM, as it suggests using the cold water pipes from the baths to make lead tablets against thieves. Many of the bath tablets state that the objects stolen are now under the responsibility of Sulis Minerva, and mention things like jewelry, clothing, and bronze cups. The defixio mentioning the stolen cup asks that it be, quote, filled with the blood of the thief, end quote. It must have been a very important cup to the caster. The tablets are now housed in the National Roman Museum at the Baths of Diocletian. Another cache of defecciones was found in a fountain of the goddess Anna Perenna, which was in use between the 4th century BCE and the 6th century CE. The fountain was unearthed in northern Rome in 1999 during an excavation under a parking structure in the Piazza Euclid. The cache contained a number of tablets, but also a number of figurines made of wax and flour, all of which appear to have been made in a very similar way. The figurines were also encased in lead canisters, one of which was still marked by the fingerprint of whoever closed the canister. The canisters have names written on them, sometimes more than one, but are also heavily corroded, which makes reading them difficult. The most legible name is Antonius. After modern fingerprint analysis, it was found that the print likely belonged to a woman. This discovery was taken by many researchers as evidence for female magical practitioners being the professionals when it came to defectiones. In literary sources from this time period, females are more often mentioned as professional practitioners of curses than men, and this fingerprint seems to support that. However, the figurines are still being analyzed and cleaned, so only time will tell if this hypothesis is still supported by this find. As you can see, the process of making or purchasing defecciones and then placing them was quite complex. It required a specific formula, and likely other ritual processes. The tablets were believed to work, as indicated by the amulets created to stop people from being cursed, and the literary sources mentioning severe punishments for those who made them. One reason defecciones may have been illegal is that they were thought to work. This gave any individual, from any level of society, power and control greater than that of the ruling class and the government. It was a serious threat to those in power, and therefore something they likely wanted to prevent, or at least control. But did defecciones actually work? Probably not, so why were they thought to be so effective? Dr. John Gager, retired professor from Princeton University, suggests that creating a defixio made a person feel in control and allowed a transfer of emotion. They might also represent the universal human practice of swearing during moments of anger, frustration, uncertainty, and competition, just more formalized than modern swearing. Also, if word got around that someone had cursed you, you might be so paranoid or scared that whatever effect the tablet demanded, such as losing a court case, might actually happen due to the fear distracting you, which would lead the caster to believe their curse was effective. Even if they didn't actually work, defecciones were believed to work by the people of ancient Greece and Rome, giving them immense power. That belief, along with the sometimes disturbing text and pierced figurines that went with them, is what causes curse tablets to spark our curiosity. The Morbid Curiosity podcast was produced by H. Lloyd. If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a morbid topic for me to talk about, you can tweet the show @MorbidPodcast or find us on Facebook and Instagram @Morbid Curiosity Podcast. If you like the show, please share us on social media, and please give us a rating on iTunes. Your shares and ratings help us reach new listeners and expand this wonderfully creepy community. Thank you to everyone who commented, suggested topics, shared MCP posts, liked or followed the MCP on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and gave us ratings on iTunes. People like Aaron, Rosie, Overspilled Ink, Emma H., Dirt Queen 15, Woman King, Kelly, Tracy, Powell, Richard, and Sarah. Laura Swan 13, Jacinta, Madge, Heidi, and Kayla all have my eternal gratitude for becoming patrons. Thank you so much. Because of you, the listeners, our creepy community is growing, especially on Facebook, so head over there to engage with other listeners, discuss episodes and news articles, and share your own creepy stories and cute pet pictures. The MCP is part of a wider creepy community known as the Belfry Podcast Network. Check out the other shows on the Belfry Network at www.thebelfry.rip. As I said before, if you really like the MCP, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. You can also give one-time donations by going to our website, www.morbidcuriositypodcast.com, and clicking the donate button. On our website, you can also find links to all our social media and sponsors, and other ways to contact us. If you'd rather contact us by mail, this address is also listed on the website. Another way to help the show is by going to our Amazon wish list at bit.ly/morbidwishlist. On this list are items that will help us improve the podcast, improve our workspace, and some things that are just for fun. Any purchases from this list are greatly appreciated. We are eternally grateful for your support. My name is Hallie, and until next time, thanks for listening.